Alex never thought that one day he would fall in love with a woman who belonged to another, let alone his own brother. But when he sees the fear and pain in Lily's eyes, his feelings become stronger than any prohibitions, and the choice becomes agonizingly inevitable. Alex was returning home after a long absence. The wind drove yellowed leaves through the streets, and the sky seemed ready to burst into rain. He walked slowly, scanning the familiar facades of buildings that now seemed foreign after so many years of wandering. The city had changed. Or maybe he had changed. Once, this was where his childhood and youth had unfolded, but now he felt like a stranger. Brian. He hadn't seen his brother in years. All this time, Alex had deliberately kept his distance, not wanting to remind anyone of his existence. Brian had always been the family's shining star. Successful, charismatic, confident. Their parents were proud of him, of his victories, of his ambitions. Alex, on the other hand, was the one people spoke about with pity, a man without direction, a dreamer who never found his place. He had grown used to it, even accepted it. But now he was here again. He didn't want to return, but circumstances forced him. Brian had invited him to dinner for his birthday. He couldn't refuse, his mother wouldn't understand. Alex sighed, stopped in front of the familiar house, inhaled the cold air, and knocked on the door. The door opened and there she was. Lily. She looked just as he remembered, delicate, refined, with large brown eyes that now carried a hint of exhaustion. For a few seconds they simply stared at each other. Then she smiled, softly but somewhat strained. Alex. It's been a long time, she said quietly. Yes, a long time, he responded, trying not to show his surprise. Lily was his brother's wife, and once Alex had thought they were the perfect match. They were both beautiful, successful, harmonious. But now there was pain in her eyes that he didn't recall. Come in, she said, stepping aside. Brian will be happy to see you. Alex entered the house. Everything looked impeccable, stylish furniture, soft lighting, a faint scent of expensive perfume. But there was something cold, sterile in this perfection. He felt out of place. From deep inside the house, a confident voice rang out. Alex. Brother. What the hell took you so long? Brian appeared, tall, strong, with a smile full of self-assurance. He looked just as he always had. Confident, well-groomed, with a firm handshake and an intense gaze that made others feel small. It's been a while, Alex smiled. Damn right. Glad you finally decided to come back. How's your adventure been? Did you finally find yourself? Brian clapped him on the shoulder. Alex suppressed his irritation. That tone, always a bit condescending, slightly mocking. Still the same, he replied shortly. Ah, well, maybe now you'll stay a little longer? See how normal people live. Come on, let's have a drink. Alex glanced at Lily. She stood slightly to the side, her smile gone, her gaze dull. Something about that unsettled him, though he couldn't yet figure out what. All evening Alex observed them. Brian laughed, told stories, played the life of the party as always. Lily sat beside him but seemed distant. She barely spoke, only nodding occasionally when Brian addressed her. After dinner, Alex stepped out into the garden. The night air was fresh, the stars faintly shimmering in the sky. He heard footsteps behind him. Lily, don't you miss home? She asked quietly, stopping beside him. Alex shrugged. I don't even know what home is for me. Somewhere along the road I thought it was here. But now, I'm not so sure. Lily gave a sad smile. I understand. Sometimes the place that should be home feels more like a prison. Alex frowned, looking at her. Something in her voice, in those words, sounded too raw. Are you okay, Lily? She averted her eyes, nodded quickly. Of course. It's just that sometimes the past catches up. You know how it is. Alex could tell she was hiding something, but he didn't press. One thing was certain, the Lily he remembered was different. The woman standing beside him now was broken, subdued, and he intended to find out why. Alex couldn't help but notice the changes in Lily's behavior. Her eyes no longer held the liveliness he remembered. She was beautiful, elegant, smiling at those around her, but to him that smile seemed forced, empty. He saw how she barely touched her food during dinner, how her hands clenched the fabric of her dress whenever Brian was near. Something was wrong. At first, Alex dismissed it as his imagination. He hadn't seen Lily in a long time, and maybe he was just overthinking things. But the more time he spent in his brother's house, the stronger his feeling grew that beneath the facade of prosperity, something dark was lurking. One evening he stepped onto the terrace to get some fresh air after an intense dinner. Brian's house was always full of guests, and Alex felt out of place in this world of glitz and expensive things. He heard muffled voices from the next room. At first, he paid no attention, but then sharp notes in his brother's voice caught his ear. "You should be smarter, Lily." Brian's voice was cold, irritated. I just wanted." Her voice trembled, but he cut her off quickly. "You wanted? Do you even understand what you're doing? Stop acting like you have a choice." Alex froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He didn't hear any blows, but there was so much threat in Brian's voice that Alex's fists clenched. When Lily stepped out of the room, her face was pale. She tried to slip away quickly, but Alex caught up with her in the hallway. "Lily, what happened?" he asked quietly. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with fear. Then she quickly shook her head. "Everything's fine, Alex," she forced out. Just a tense day." But he didn't believe her. He couldn't. Now he knew. Her life with Brian was far from the fairy tale it seemed from the outside. Alex started watching even more closely. He noticed how Lily avoided her husband's gaze, how she was always on edge when he was around. Even her laughter, once so bright, now sounded cautious, almost apologetic. The next day, he accidentally saw her in the garden. She was sitting on a wooden bench, hugging herself. Her shoulders trembled, and her lips were tightly pressed together. Alex took a step forward, but Lily heard him and quickly wiped her tears. "Alex," her voice broke. "Did you need something?" He looked at her, unsure of how to bring up what was troubling him. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay," he said. She tried to smile, but it came out weak. "Of course. Everything's fine. Just tired." Alex sat down beside her, not looking away. "Lily, you know you can trust me, right?" She nodded, but something in her expression told him otherwise. "Of course, Alex. Thank you." But he could see it was a lie. Something was happening. And now he was sure. He needed to find out the truth. The next day, Alex did not expect to see Lily in the park. He had simply gone out for a walk to clear his head, to try to shake off the troubling thoughts that had followed him since returning to town. But when he saw her sitting on a wooden bench with her head bowed, something inside him clenched. Lily was crying. She didn't even try to hide it. Dark strands of hair fell over her face. Her shoulders trembled with suppressed sobs. Alex froze for a moment, then stepped forward. "Lily," he called softly. She flinched and hastily ran her hands over her face, as if hoping to erase the traces of her tears. She looked up at him and forced a smile, but the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. "Alex." Her voice was hoarse. "You scared me." "Sorry. Are you okay?" She lifted her head as if preparing to lie, but then slowly shook it. "No," she whispered. "Not at all." Alex sat down beside her, sensing the tension in her posture. Lily clasped her hands together, trying to hold herself steady, but her lips trembled. He waited, not rushing her, letting her speak in her own time. "Brian has changed, Alex," she finally said. "He's become different. Harsh. Distant. Sometimes," her voice wavered, "sometimes I feel like I'm just an object to him, something he can control." Alex clenched his fists. He didn't like the way her words sounded. This was nothing like the happy image he had once seen. "Does he hurt you?" he asked cautiously. Lily was silent for a few seconds, then slowly nodded. "Not in the way you think. He has never raised a hand against me, but he pressures me. He watches every step I take, controls what I say, who I see. It's like he's always there, even when he isn't." She clenched her fingers until her knuckles turned white. "I don't feel like myself anymore." Alex placed his hand over hers. She flinched but didn't pull away. "You're not alone, Lily," he said quietly. "If you need help, I'm here." She looked up at him, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. But deep down, fear still lingered. "I don't know if I can leave," she whispered. "He won't let me go." Alex felt anger rising inside him, but he also knew this was not the time for emotions. The most important thing was to be there for her, to support her. "We'll figure something out," he promised. Lily gave a faint smile, but her eyes welled with tears again. Alex squeezed her hand a little tighter, understanding that this conversation was only the beginning. Alex couldn't get their conversation in the park out of his head. Lily had admitted that she lived under constant pressure, that Brian had become harsh and controlling. But what if it went even deeper? Alex felt that there was something she hadn't said. He had to find out the truth. That evening, sitting in a bar, he was scrolling through his phone when he saw a familiar name in the news feed. Brian. A photo of his brother with an unfamiliar woman. They were sitting too close together, and Brian's expression was far too intimate for a simple business interaction. Alex frowned. He didn't immediately decide to tell Lily. For several days, he carried this knowledge with him, tormented by doubts. But when he saw her again, tired, tense, her gaze empty, his doubts vanished. "Lily, I need to talk to you," he said when they met in a small cafe. She immediately sensed that the conversation would be difficult. "What happened?" Her voice was quiet, but there was already a note of anxiety in it. Alex pulled out his phone and showed her the photo. Lily froze. Her fingers clenched, and for a moment, she just stared at the screen unblinking. Then slowly she pushed the phone aside. "I know," she said. Those two words shocked Alex. He had expected anything but this. "You know? Lily, why haven't you left him?" He tried to keep his voice steady, but there was more emotion in it than he wanted to show. Lily smiled sadly, but there was no joy in it. "Because it wouldn't change anything, Alex. I tried. But he's not the kind of man who lets people walk away just like that." "This isn't a life, Lily," he said, struggling to stay composed. "You shouldn't be afraid of your own husband." She looked away. "Do you think I don't understand that?" Her voice trembled. "I thought I could endure it. I thought it was just a rough patch. But then I realized he had changed. Or maybe he had always been this way, and I just didn't see it." "Lily," Alex wanted to reach for her hand, but she pulled away. "Please, Alex, don't get involved," she pleaded. "It will only make things worse." "Worse for whom? For you? Or for him?" His voice was tight with tension. She shook her head, and something close to despair flickered in her eyes. "You don't understand what he's capable of." Alex looked at her, and for the first time, he truly grasped the depth of her fear. He couldn't just leave things as they were. But he also knew that if he pushed too hard, Lily would only withdraw further. "All right," he finally said. "I won't interfere. But if you ever need help, promise me you'll tell me." She held his gaze for a long moment before nodding. "All right," she echoed, barely audible. But Alex already knew he wouldn't just stand by. He was going to do something. Alex didn't know when everything had spiraled out of control. He hadn't planned on falling in love with his brother's wife, hadn't sought out this feeling, but it had come on its own, like an inevitable storm he couldn't fight. After that evening at the cafe, they started meeting more often. Casual encounters turned into long conversations. Lily began seeking his gaze, letting her touches linger longer than they should. Alex tried to pull away, to tell himself this was wrong, but with each passing day, it became harder to resist. Days passed in anxious anticipation. Alex found himself searching for her gaze even in crowded places, listening for every phone call in the hope that it was her. They both knew they were balancing on the edge, but they couldn't stop themselves. One evening, he found her by the riverbank where they had often come as children. The wind played with her hair, and the moonlight gave her an ethereal fragility. She stood hugging herself as if trying to protect herself from something unseen. "Were you looking for me?" he asked softly, stepping closer. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes, usually filled with worry, were softer tonight. "I just wanted some quiet," she said. "And I knew you'd come." Alex clenched his fists. He shouldn't have come. He should have walked away. But instead he stayed. "Lily." He exhaled her name. And in that one word was more emotion than he wanted to reveal. She turned to him, their eyes meeting. In that second, Alex realized they were standing on the edge, and if they stepped forward, there would be no turning back. "Alex, I don't know what to do." Her voice trembled. "I can't leave, but I can't live like this anymore." He wanted to tell her that he would help her, that he would always be there. But instead of words, he reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't pull away. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered. "I'm already hurting," she replied. And then he kissed her. Slowly, cautiously, as if giving her the chance to stop him. But she didn't. Lily pressed against him, and in that moment all their fears, doubts, and pain disappeared. There was only the two of them. But deep inside, Alex knew it was wrong. He couldn't allow this. He couldn't betray his brother, no matter what kind of man he was. He couldn't ruin Lily's life even more. When they pulled away, her eyes were filled with tears. "We can't," she whispered. "I know," he replied. They both knew. But that didn't make their feelings any weaker. The temptation was too strong, and their hearts were too vulnerable. No matter how much they tried to resist, the line between them had already been erased. The following days were agony. They couldn't avoid each other, yet being near one another was torture. Every accidental touch, every smile, every stolen glance only heightened the tension. Alex felt himself losing control, and Lily grew more desperate. One night she called him. Her voice was trembling, filled with anxiety. "Alex," she whispered. "I can't sleep. I'm scared." He was silent for a few seconds, struggling against the urge to go to her immediately. But then he answered firmly, "I'm coming." When he entered her house, Lily stood by the window, illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlights. Her shoulders were trembling, and her eyes were full of tears. He didn't ask what had happened. He simply stepped closer and gently wrapped his arms around her. She pressed against him, and he could feel her heart racing. "I can't do this anymore, Alex." Her voice was barely audible. "I can't keep living like this." Alex brushed his fingers along her cheek, making her look at him. "Then let's change something," he said firmly. They didn't know what the future held, but both understood. They couldn't go on like this any longer. Alex felt himself sinking deeper into someone else's nightmare with each passing day. What had started as concern for Lily had now turned into a real battle. He could no longer turn a blind eye to what was happening. He needed to know the truth. One evening, while wandering through the city center, he spotted Brian. He was standing outside an expensive restaurant, accompanied by two men in tailored suits. Their conversation was tense, and even from a distance, Alex could feel the strain in the air. He watched as Brian gestured animatedly, and then one of the men slipped a thick envelope into his hand. In that moment, a chill ran through Alex. Determined to dig deeper, Alex used every possible connection to uncover more about his brother's dealings. What he found shocked him. Brian wasn't just cheating on Lily. That was only the tip of the iceberg. He was involved in corruption schemes, blackmail, and possibly even crimes that could cost someone their life. Each new discovery was more alarming than the last. Alex learned that years ago, one of Brian's former business partners had mysteriously disappeared. The man had left behind debts, but no trace of him was ever found. Several journalists who had attempted to investigate Brian's company suddenly abandoned their stories. It wasn't just suspicious, it was terrifying. That night, Alex went to see Lily. She opened the door, and fear immediately flashed in her eyes. "What happened?" she asked, looking at him anxiously. "We need to talk," he said firmly. They sat in the living room. Alex pulled out his phone and showed her the photos, the documents he had gathered. Lily stared at the screen and froze. Her face turned pale. "No," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "I knew he wasn't honest, but not like this." "Lily, you're in danger," Alex said quietly. "Brian isn't just controlling you. He's doing things that could land him in prison. If someone wants to use you against him. She clenched her fingers tightly. He's threatened me, Alex, she finally admitted. He said that if I ever tried to leave, if I told anyone, he would destroy me and my family. Alex felt rage rise inside him. We won't let that happen, he said firmly. I'm going to get you out of here. We'll find a way. Lily looked terrified, but for the first time in a long while, hope flickered in her eyes. She finally felt that she wasn't alone. But if he finds out, her voice trembled. He's watching me. I don't know how, but I always feel his presence. Alex ran his hands over his face, gathering his thoughts. Then we have to be careful, he said resolutely. We'll prepare. Lily still looked scared, but determination seeped through the fear. She nodded slowly. Okay. Alex knew the game was getting dangerous. But now he couldn't stop. The biggest challenge was still ahead. Lily hadn't slept for several nights. Every movement Brian made, his gaze, his tone of voice, everything told her that he suspected something. He was irritable, tense, asking questions she was too afraid to answer. It felt like he could sense her fear, anticipate her desire to leave. She knew that if she didn't make her move now, she might never get another chance. Alex was the only person she could trust. They met at a small motel on the outskirts of the city. Lily sat on the bed, clutching an old bag she had been packing for days. It contained only the essentials, documents, some money, clothes. She couldn't take anything else. Everything else was left behind in a house that could never be her home again. Are you sure? Alex sat across from her, watching her with concern. Yes, she answered without looking up. If I stay, he will destroy me. Maybe not physically, but I haven't been living for a long time, Alex. I've just been existing. Alex ran a hand over his face, trying to suppress the rising tension. All right. I bought the tickets. You'll have a new life. But we have to be careful. He might start looking for you immediately. Lily met his gaze, filled with gratitude and fear. I don't know what I would do without you. Alex squeezed her hand. You'll never be alone again, he said firmly. But that same evening everything went wrong. Lily returned home to grab a few last things when she heard the door slam shut behind her. Brian stood in the hallway, his eyes burning with fury. You thought I wouldn't notice? His voice was low, threatening. Lily froze, her heart pounding wildly. What are you talking about? She tried to steady herself. Brian took a step forward, clenching his fists. You tried to deceive me. You thought I wouldn't find out? That you could just disappear. He grabbed her wrist, but at that moment, the front door burst open, and Alex stormed into the room. Let her go, he shouted without hesitation. Brian slowly turned his head, his lips twisting into a sneer. Oh, so that's how it is, he hissed. My own brother. You think you can take her away from me? Lily took the opportunity to break free, but Brian shoved her hard and she hit the wall. You're finished, Brian, Alex said coldly, stepping closer. And then the fight began. Blows came fast and hard. Alex knew his brother was strong, but this time he was ready. He was fighting for Lily, for her freedom. Blood trickled from his lip, but he didn't stop. Lily, summoning her last reserves of strength, ran out of the house. She couldn't wait. She knew that if she stayed, Brian would never let her go. She could hear the struggle continuing behind her, but she didn't look back. She sprinted through the dark streets, not knowing where else to go except to the safe place they had planned. When Alex finally appeared beside her, panting and with bruises on his face, she barely held back her tears. Are you okay? He asked, gripping her shoulders. She nodded, but her eyes were full of terror. He won't stop, Alex, she whispered. He'll find me. Alex looked at her and shook his head. Then we need to hide better and prepare for what comes next. Lily took one last step away from her past. Now, her life depended on whether they could disappear. But one thing she knew for sure. There was no turning back. Brian lost control. He stormed through the room, smashing everything in his path. His world was crumbling and he couldn't allow that. Lily had escaped. Alex had betrayed him. But the worst part, he had lost control. And that Brian could never tolerate. Find her, he hissed into the phone. Turn the city upside down, but bring her back. The person on the other end gave a short response before the line went dead. Brian clenched his fists. Did Lily really think she could just disappear? That he would allow her to live her own life? No. He would find her. And when he did, she would regret her defiance. Alex and Lily were hiding in a small motel in another city. It was a temporary solution, but for now the only safe one. Lily sat by the window, her hands trembling. Alex placed a cup of hot tea in front of her. You need to rest, he said softly. Lily shook her head. I can't. I know he's looking for me. I can feel it. Alex sat beside her and took her hand in his. We'll get through this, Lily. I won't let him take you. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and fear. You don't understand. He never gives up, Alex. He won't just find me, he'll destroy you. You have no idea what he's capable of. Alex frowned. He knew Brian wouldn't stop, but he was ready to fight. I'm tired of running, he said firmly. We need to do something. Brian won't stop hunting us until we give him a reason to. Lily tightened her grip on his hand. What do you mean? Alex sighed. He knew there was only one way to end this. But how? We need evidence, he finally said. Everything he has. I know he's involved in illegal activities. If we can get that information into the right hands, he'll end up behind bars. Lily turned pale. That's dangerous. If he finds out you're digging into his business. He already hates me, Alex gritted his teeth. But I don't care. I won't let him break you again. She looked at him and something new flickered in her eyes. Hope. For the first time in a long time. All right, she whispered. I'll help you. Alex squeezed her hand tighter. We'll end this, Lily. Once and for all. At the same time, Brian wasn't sitting idly by. His men were checking every possible hideout, motel, and station. He couldn't allow Lily and Alex to disappear forever. One of his men managed to intercept a call from a number Alex had used. It was a lead. We found them, the man reported over the phone. Where are they? Brian asked, feeling a surge of adrenaline. The western outskirts of the city. We're keeping an eye on them. Brian's lips curled into a cruel smirk. Perfect. Now they'll learn what it means to betray me. He was ready to act. Alex and Lily still didn't know that their time was running out. Alex knew they had no choice. Simply hiding and running wasn't enough. Brian would never stop. He had to be taken down, not just physically but legally. That's why he and Lily began gathering evidence. Every step was dangerous. Lily recalled account numbers, overheard conversations, locations of secret meetings. Alex hacked into several electronic devices, uncovering incriminating messages and financial records. Everything pointed to Brian's involvement in money laundering, blackmail, and possibly even violence. They spent the night sorting through the data. Lily's heart pounded. Her fear of her husband's brother hadn't faded. But she knew that if they didn't act now, they wouldn't have a future. We need to take this to the police, Alex said, reviewing the folder of documents. No matter what it costs us. He'll know it was us, Lily whispered. And if he doesn't get locked up. Alex took her hand. He won't walk away from this, he promised. They acted quickly. Alex sent anonymous packages to several media outlets and handed the materials to the police through a trusted contact. But Brian sensed the threat. Brian sat in his office, sorting through a stack of documents when his phone rang. Talk, he snapped into the receiver. We have a problem, the voice reported. Someone sent the police files on you. And it looks like they have enough to put you away for a long time. Brian's face darkened. He knew who was behind this. Alex. Who else? Find them, he ordered. I won't let them win. But he didn't know that the police had already begun moving in. Alex and Lily relocated to another city, changing their address. They knew the danger wasn't over. But for the first time in a long while, they could breathe freely. However, news of Brian's downfall came quickly. Every news channel broadcasted reports on his crimes, his arrest, and the exposure of his criminal network. Their plan had worked. "It's over," Lily exhaled, staring at the television screen. But just then a knock came at the door. When Alex opened it, 2 police officers stood on the threshold. "Alex Mitchell?" one of them asked. "Yes," Alex replied. "We need you to come with us. We've found your brother." He tried to escape but was apprehended at the border. Lily covered her mouth, barely holding back tears of relief. "He was arrested?" Alex asked again. "Yes," the officer confirmed. "He's in federal custody. But he left you a message." Alex clenched his fists. The officer met his gaze and slowly relayed the words. He said, "You'll pay for this." Alex exchanged a glance with Lily. They had won the battle, but the war wasn't over. Ahead of them lay a new life, free of fear, yet with the knowledge that somewhere out there, Brian still thirsted for revenge. The city that had once been their home was now behind them. Alex and Lily sat in the car, watching as the miles of road carried them away from their past. They didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. There was no going back. For several days they traveled, avoiding big cities and stopping at small motels. They needed time to gather themselves, to realize that the nightmare was over. But fear still lingered deep inside. "Do you regret it?" Alex asked quietly, his eyes fixed on the road. Lily looked at him. There was no fear in her eyes anymore. Only exhaustion and something that resembled hope. "Regret what?" "That it ended this way. That we left everything behind." She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No. I'm scared, but I don't regret it." Alex nodded. He felt the same. Their lives now belonged to them alone. Brian could no longer reach them. After days of traveling, they found a place that felt right. A small town surrounded by green hills, where no one knew their names. They rented a house without asking each other if it was temporary or forever. They just wanted to feel like they had a roof over their heads that they wouldn't have to flee from in a hurry. For the first time in a long while, they could relax. Lily sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun slowly rise over the horizon. Alex stepped outside and sat beside her. "How are you?" he asked. She smiled shyly but genuinely. "I think I'm finally learning to breathe." Alex reached for her hand, and she placed hers in his. Their fingers intertwined, as if they no longer needed to pretend there was nothing between them. "We'll make it," he said. Lily looked at him, and there was no doubt in her eyes. "Yes. Now we definitely will." Weeks passed. They built a new life filled with small joys and freedom. Lily got a job at a small library, while Alex found his place in home renovations. They enjoyed living without constantly looking over their shoulders, without fear that someone was watching. One evening, Lily sat outside, hugging her knees as she gazed at the stars. Alex approached and sat beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She sighed. "That all of this feels too good to be true." Alex smiled gently. "It is true, Lily. We earned this." She leaned toward him, her lips trembling, not from fear this time but from emotion. "I want to believe that, Alex. I want to be with you." "You already are," he whispered, holding her tighter. They sat together for a long time, savoring the silence, one free of fear, free of threats. Only the new life they had started together. True love and freedom cannot exist in fear and oppression. Only courage, determination, and the willingness to fight for one's happiness can lead to a new life, free from the pain of the past. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button, so you don't miss more heartwarming stories.